Top 10 Golden Age, Hollywood's most dashing leading men of all time. Then and now, they were the gods of the silver screen, men who defined masculinity for generations of Americans. But behind those chiseled jaws and perfect smiles lay Hollywood's best-kept secret, an army of doctors, stylists, and publicists who manufactured these icons from ordinary men. The transformation of number 3 on our list was so extreme, it would shock audiences today and completely change how you view one of cinema's greatest legends. And number 4, his story will absolutely break your heart, the tragic tale that still brings fans to tears decades later. Which of these leading men was your childhood hero? Drop a comment below. I personally can't get enough of their classic films and the golden era of Hollywood glamour they represent. When we look back at Golden Age Hollywood's leading men, we see more than just actors. We see the blueprint for American masculinity that influenced generations. These weren't just handsome men who happened to be in the right place at the right time. They were carefully crafted products of the powerful studio system, which controlled everything from their public appearances to their private lives. In the 1930s and 40s, studios molded their male stars to project strength and sophisticated charm. By the 1950s, a new rugged authenticity became marketable, even if it required just as much behind-the-scenes manipulation to achieve. Our countdown spans the most iconic men of classic Hollywood, revealing not just their legendary status, but also the real stories behind their carefully constructed images. Let's count down the 10 most dashing leading men of Hollywood's golden age, and see what became of these legends as they aged beyond their carefully managed prime years. 10. Gregory Peck. When Gregory Peck first appeared on screen in the 1940s, audiences were instantly captivated by his imposing 6 feet 3 inches frame, resonant voice, and an unmistakable moral authority that radiated from his performances. With films like To Kill a Mockingbird, Roman Holiday, and Gentleman's Agreement, Peck established himself as Hollywood's conscience, the embodiment of integrity and dignified masculinity. What made Peck particularly unique among Golden Age stars was his remarkable consistency both on and off screen. Unlike many of his contemporaries, Peck's personal image required relatively little studio management because he naturally embodied the qualities audiences admired in his characters. Greg was that rare star who didn't need much polishing, noted longtime studio publicist Alan Winston in his memoir. He walked into the room and commanded it naturally. The studio's job wasn't creating an image for him, but simply making sure people saw what was already there. This authenticity extended to his physical appearance as well. While some stars relied heavily on cosmetic enhancements, Peck's photogenic features remained largely unaltered throughout his career. His only significant concession to Hollywood's appearance standards was dental work in the early 1940s to create the perfect smile that would become one of his trademarks. As Peck aged, he embraced the process with the same dignity that characterized his performances. By the 1980s and 90s, his once dark hair had turned a distinguished silver and lines creased his famous face, but the essential Gregory Peck remained unmistakable. When Peck passed away in 2003 at age 87, he was celebrated not just as a great actor, but as one of the last genuine articles from Hollywood's golden era, a star whose authentic self aligned remarkably well with his public image. 9. Errol Flynn. The phrase "in like Flynn" entered the American lexicon for good reason. Errol Flynn's dashing looks, athletic prowess, and bad boy charisma made him the ultimate swashbuckling heartthrob of the 1930s and 40s. With films like Captain Blood, The Adventures of Robin Hood, and The Seahawk, Flynn defined the action hero for an entire generation. What audiences didn't realize was that Flynn's seemingly effortless appeal was the product of careful studio management from the moment Warner Brothers discovered the unknown Australian actor. Studio records reveal that Flynn underwent significant dental reconstruction in 1935, replacing several damaged teeth and reshaping others to create his dazzling smile before his breakthrough in Captain Blood. More elaborate was the creation of Flynn's public persona as a natural athlete. While genuinely skilled, Flynn received extensive training to perfect the swordplay and stunts that became his trademark. His famous shirtless scenes were preceded by grueling workout sessions and strategic lighting to emphasize his physique, pioneering techniques that action stars still use today. Flynn understood the business of being Flynn, noted his longtime director Michael Curtis. He knew his value was tied to maintaining a specific appearance and image, and he worked harder at it than people realized. This carefully maintained facade began to crumble in the late 1940s as Flynn's legendary off-screen excesses, particularly his heavy drinking, took a visible toll on his appearance. By his early 40s, Flynn's face had become noticeably puffy, and his once athletic physique had softened considerably. Flynn's physical decline accelerated through the 1950s, shocking fans who saw him in person rather than through the forgiving lens of studio publicity. When he died in 1959 at just 50 years old, the contrast between his final appearance and his immortalized image was stark. A cautionary tale of how quickly the reality could diverge from the carefully crafted illusion. Film historian Richard Schickel later wrote, "Flynn's transformation from golden boy to physical wreck happened with tragic speed, yet in our cultural memory, he remains forever young, forever dashing, proof of cinema's power to freeze time and preserve beauty that in reality is fleeting." Despite his rapid decline, Flynn's legacy as the quintessential swashbuckling hero remains intact, a testament to how powerfully his youthful image was imprinted on the public consciousness during Hollywood's golden era. 8. Rock Hudson. With his perfect 6 feet 5 inches frame, square jaw, and disarming smile, Rock Hudson embodied the 1950s masculine ideal so completely that it's shocking to learn how thoroughly Universal Studios had to transform him to create that image. Born Roy Harold Scherer Jr., Hudson's metamorphosis into a leading man represents one of Hollywood's most comprehensive makeovers. When agent Henry Wilson first discovered the handsome young man working as a truck driver, he saw potential but recognized significant obstacles. Studio records show that Hudson underwent extensive coaching to lower his naturally high-pitched voice, received dental reconstruction to perfect his smile, and endured painful procedures to fix a slight ear protrusion that photographed poorly in profile shots. Even his name was manufactured, Rock, suggesting strength and solidity, while Hudson evoked American geography, creating a thoroughly masculine American identity. As studio publicist Mark Miller later revealed, creating Rock Hudson wasn't just about improving a few features, it was about engineering a complete product from the ground up. The physical transformation was just the beginning. Universal carefully crafted Hudson's public persona as the quintessential all-American ladies' man, while hiding his homosexuality through arranged dates with starlets and eventually a sham marriage organized by the studio. This dual existence created enormous pressure for Hudson to maintain not just his physical appearance, but an entirely fabricated personal life. As Hudson entered middle age in the 1960s, he worked increasingly hard to preserve his leading man image. Makeup artist Bob Schiffer recalled Hudson's growing reliance on cosmetic help. By giant, he was still naturally handsome, but by the mid-60s we were using every trick in the book, strategic lighting, camera angles, and extensive makeup, to maintain the illusion of youth. By the 1970s, Hudson had embraced character roles that accommodated his aging appearance, finding success on television in McMillan and Wife. His once black hair had grayed naturally, and while he remained handsome, the studio-mandated perfection of his early years had given way to a more authentic appearance. The final chapter of Hudson's transformation came with tragic swiftness. When he appeared gaunt and dramatically altered at a 1985 press event with Doris Day, the public was shocked. His death from AIDS-related complications later that year at age 59 not only revealed his homosexuality to a shocked public, but underscored how thoroughly his true self had been hidden behind the manufactured image. Despite this revelation, Hudson's films continue to showcase the artificial perfection that made him a star, a celluloid monument to a manufactured ideal that, while entirely constructed, continues to influence our conception of masculine appeal. 7. Robert Mitchum. In an era of carefully polished leading men, Robert Mitchum stood apart with his sleepy-eyed, world-weary gaze and an air of dangerous authenticity that made him the quintessential film noir tough guy. Yet beneath Mitchum's seemingly effortless cool was a calculated approach to his appearance that included strategic cosmetic interventions. When Mitchum first arrived in Hollywood in the early 1940s, his rugged features were considered almost too rough for leading man status. Studio executives at RKO were particularly concerned about his nose, which had been broken multiple times during his years as a professional boxer and manual laborer before turning to acting. According to film historian Robert Server's biography, Mitchum initially refused rhinoplasty, contributing to his rebel reputation. By 1947, however, after the success of Out of the Past elevated him to A-list status, Mitchum relented to studio pressure and underwent a subtle nose refinement that straightened its prominent bridge while maintaining its characteristically strong profile. What made Mitchum's cosmetic work distinctive was how it deliberately preserved the imperfections that made him stand out from more conventionally handsome leading men. His heavily lidded eyes, which many casting directors had initially considered a liability, became his trademark. When a studio executive suggested he undergo an eyelid lift in the early 1950s, Mitchum famously replied, "The eyes stay as they are. They're what get me the interesting parts." As he aged, Mitchum's approach to cosmetic maintenance focused primarily on his jawline, which had begun to soften by the mid-1960s. Rather than pursuing a traditional facelift, which might have compromised his rugged appearance, he opted for a series of more targeted procedures between 1968 and 1975. His longtime personal physician, Dr. Ronald Curran, later confirmed, "Bob had what we called maintenance work. Nothing dramatic, just enough to keep that strong jawline he was known for. He was very specific about not wanting to look worked on or prettied up in any way." Unlike many stars who fought to play increasingly younger characters as they aged, Mitchum leaned into mature roles that aligned with his natural aging process, making any cosmetic work less obvious. As he told Esquire in 1983, "I look my age. I just make sure it's a good version of my age." By the time Mitchum appeared in films like The Yakuza, 1974, and Farewell My Lovely, 1975, in his late 50s, his face had accumulated the character lines and weathered quality that perfectly suited his world-weary persona. His hair had grayed naturally, and while he maintained his distinctive jawline, he allowed other aspects of aging to progress visibly. This strategic balance, preserving certain signature features while allowing natural aging elsewhere, made Mitchum's later appearance feel authentic in a way that many of his contemporaries did not achieve. When he died in 1997 at age 79, his face still carried the essential quality that had made him a star half a century earlier, that unmistakable combination of toughness and world-weariness that defined film noir masculinity. As film critic Roger Ebert observed in a late-career interview with Mitchum, "He's the rare star who has allowed himself to age into exactly who he appears to be. There's no disconnect between the man and his image, which may be the most remarkable feat in an industry built on illusion." 6. Paul Newman. With his legendary blue eyes, athletic physique, and natural charisma, Paul Newman represented a new kind of leading man who emerged in the 1950s, masculine but sensitive, handsome but substantial. Unlike many stars of the studio era, Newman's appeal seemed to lie in his authenticity rather than manufactured perfection. This perception wasn't entirely accurate. While Newman certainly possessed natural good looks, his transformation into a leading man included strategic enhancements. Early in his career, Newman underwent minor refinements to address what studio executives considered his only physical flaws: slightly protruding ears and an asymmetry in his nose from a sports injury. Makeup artist Dick Smith, who worked with Newman on The Hustler, later revealed, "Paul had this natural photogenic quality, but there were still little adjustments. We taped his ears back slightly for close-ups in his early films and used makeup to enhance the symmetry of his features. The camera exaggerates even minor imperfections." What distinguished Newman's approach to his appearance was its consistency and restraint. Unlike many stars who pursued increasingly aggressive procedures as they aged, Newman allowed himself to age naturally after those initial refinements, focusing instead on maintaining his physical fitness through rigorous exercise and diet. As Newman entered his 50s and 60s, his face developed character lines that added gravity to his performances in films like The Verdict, 1982, and Nobody's Fool, 1994. His famous blue eyes remained as striking as ever, while his gradually silver hair enhanced rather than diminished his appeal. Newman embraced these changes, understanding that they added credibility to the mature characters he increasingly chose to play. Paul had this remarkable security in his own skin, noted director Sidney Pollack, who worked with Newman on Absence of Malice. He He knew that allowing himself to age visibly on screen gave him access to richer characters and deeper performances. He wasn't trying to hold on to his 30-year-old face. This approach paid extraordinary dividends in terms of career longevity. While many of his contemporaries struggled to maintain their leading man status as they aged, Newman continued starring in major films well into his 70s, with his lived-in face becoming a valuable dramatic tool rather than a liability to be hidden. By the time of his final on-screen appearance in Road to Perdition, 2002, at age 77, Newman had achieved something remarkable in Hollywood. He had aged not just gracefully, but compellingly, with each line and silver hair adding to rather than detracting from his screen presence. When Newman died in 2008 at age 83, tributes focused not just on his extraordinary handsomeness in youth, but on how his entire life journey was reflected in his face, a quality rare among leading men of his era. As film critic Leonard Maltin observed, Newman gave us something extraordinary, a leading man who allowed us to watch him age honestly, decade by decade, film by film, without pretense or evident vanity. In an industry often obsessed with preserving youth at all costs, Newman's evolution represented a road less traveled, and proved that authenticity could be not just personally fulfilling, but commercially viable as well. 5. Gene Kelly. With his athletic grace, megawatt smile, and inexhaustible energy, Gene Kelly revolutionized the movie musical and created a new masculine ideal that combined strength with artistry. Behind Kelly's seemingly effortless appeal, however, was a carefully crafted image that required constant maintenance. When Kelly arrived in Hollywood in 1941, after success on Broadway, MGM executives immediately identified several physical limitations that needed addressing before he could become a leading man. Studio dental records show that Kelly underwent extensive work to create his dazzling smile, with several teeth being capped and reshaped to achieve the perfect symmetry that would become one of his trademarks. More significant was the studio's concern about Kelly's receding hairline, which was already noticeable in his late 20s. MGM's solution involved custom-made hairpieces that Kelly wore in almost every film from For Me and My Gal, 1942, onwards. These hairpieces were constructed with extraordinary attention to detail, using human hair hand-sewn into an almost undetectable base. Kelly's longtime makeup artist William Tuttle later recalled, "Gene's hairpieces were works of art, the best money could buy. They had to be, because his physically demanding dance numbers would have revealed anything less than perfect. We had several identical ones made for each film because the sweat would require them to be cleaned and restyled constantly." This behind-the-scenes effort created the illusion of Kelly's perfect physique and youthful vitality that audiences admired in classics like Singin' in the Rain, 1952, and An American in Paris, 1951. The maintenance of this image required extraordinary discipline from Kelly himself, who followed a rigorous exercise regimen and diet decades before such practices became common among male stars. As Kelly aged into his 50s and 60s, maintaining the athletic dancer image became increasingly challenging. For his television appearances in the 1970s, more sophisticated hairpieces and strategic lighting helped preserve the youthful impression, while makeup techniques evolved to address the natural signs of aging. By the time of his final major public appearances in the 1980s, Kelly had largely retired from dancing, but still cultivated a carefully maintained image. Even in his 70s, he rarely appeared in public without careful preparation, understanding that his brand was inextricably linked to the virile, energetic persona he had established decades earlier. Film historian Janine Bassinger notes, "What made Kelly's image particularly demanding to maintain was that it wasn't just about looking handsome, it was about projecting physical vitality and athleticism. That's a much harder illusion to preserve as you age than mere facial attractiveness." When Kelly died in 1996 at age 83, most of the public had not seen him perform or make public appearances for many years. This strategic withdrawal allowed his dynamic screen image to remain intact in cultural memory, forever the virile, athletic dancer splashing through puddles or swinging around lampposts with boundless energy. As choreographer and Kelly protege Kenny Ortega observed, Gene understood that his legacy was tied to a specific physical impression. By carefully managing his later public appearances, he ensured that when people thought of Gene Kelly, they would always see that perfect athlete in perpetual motion, an image he had worked his entire career to create and maintain. 4. James Dean. prepare for heartbreak. James Dean's legendary status rests on just 3 films, and a life cut tragically short at age 24, transforming him from a promising young actor into the ultimate symbol of beautiful, rebellious youth frozen in time forever. What many fans don't realize is how carefully constructed Dean's seemingly authentic rebel image actually was. When Dean arrived in Hollywood in the early 1950s, he was a conventionally handsome but unremarkable young actor struggling to find meaningful roles. His transformation into the icon we remember began when director Elia Kazan cast him in East of Eden, 1955, and helped shape not just his performance, but his entire persona. Studio records reveal that Warner Brothers initially had concerns about Dean's physical appearance, particularly his slightly uneven teeth and acne-prone skin. Before filming began on East of Eden, Dean underwent dental work to improve his smile while maintaining the slightly imperfect quality that added to his authentic appeal. Makeup techniques were developed specifically to address his skin issues while maintaining a naturalistic look on camera. Costume designer Moss Mabry, who worked on Rebel Without a Cause, later revealed how methodically Dean's iconic look was created. Nothing about James's appearance was accidental. We tested dozens of different t-shirts to find the exact cut and fabric that would photograph perfectly. His jeans were custom fitted and pre-distressed to achieve just the right lived-in quality. Even his seemingly casual hair was carefully styled to look artfully disheveled. What made Dean's manufactured image revolutionary was how it created the appearance of rejection of Hollywood polish rather than conformity to it. As film historian David Thompson noted, Dean's genius, both personal and professional, was making something meticulously crafted appear completely spontaneous and authentic. The tragic irony of Dean's story lies in how his fatal car crash in September 1955 occurred just as this carefully constructed image was about to reach mass audiences. Rebel Without a Cause hadn't yet been released, and Giant was still in production. His death transformed him instantly from promising actor to eternal icon, with no opportunity to age beyond the perfect youthful specimen we remember. The preservation of Dean's image took on a different dimension after his death, as studios, photographers, and mythology worked together to perfect and protect his legacy. Damaged negatives were retouched, unflattering photos suppressed, and the narrative of the beautiful rebel carefully curated by those who stood to profit from his posthumous fame. What breaks our hearts about Dean isn't just the tragedy of his early death, but the loss of what might have been, the natural evolution of both his art and his appearance that we'll never witness. While other entries on our list show how stars aged and changed over decades, Dean remains perpetually 24, preserved in artificial perfection. This preservation in perfect youth makes Dean's story uniquely heartbreaking among Hollywood legends. A promising beginning with no middle or end. A beautiful young man who never had the chance to become an interesting older one. The careful manufacturing of his rebel image, frozen at its peak, continues to break hearts decades after his death. Would Dean have maintained his raw electricity as he aged? Would he have embraced or fought the natural changes to his appearance? These questions remain forever unanswered, leaving us with just the perfectly crafted image of beautiful youth in eternal rebellion. 3. Clark Gable. Known as the King of Hollywood, Clark Gable's smoldering looks and confident charm made him one of MGM's most valuable assets for nearly 3 decades. What fans didn't realize was that the Clark Gable who captivated audiences in Gone with the Wind and It Happened One Night was a carefully crafted creation, one that began with significant cosmetic intervention. When Gable arrived in Hollywood in the late 1920s, studio executives immediately identified multiple problems with his appearance. Protruding ears that stuck out noticeably from his head, severely damaged teeth that affected his smile, and facial features they considered too coarse for a leading man. MGM wasted no time addressing these concerns, viewing them as fixable obstacles to creating their next leading man. The ear procedures of the 1930s were far more invasive than today's otoplasty techniques. Known as ear pinning, the surgery involved cutting behind the ears and using sutures to permanently pull them closer to the head. According to MGM's medical records, Gable underwent this painful procedure in 1932 without general anesthesia, using only local numbing and alcohol for pain management. More extensive were the dental procedures Gable endured. His early publicity photos show a noticeably different smile, with uneven, damaged teeth resulting from both poor childhood dental care and a severe gum infection that had plagued him for years. MGM arranged for the complete extraction of most of his teeth and fitted him with a full denture. Actress Carole Lombard, who later became Gable's wife, reportedly joked about his dentures, once giving him a Valentine's Day present of a heart-shaped box containing his spare set with a note reading, "Keep these with you, as I want to make sure that smile stays in our family." The transformation was so successful that it became the template for how studios would handle male stars' appearances moving forward, addressing issues without creating an obviously worked-on look. MGM's investment paid off spectacularly as Gable's refined appearance, combined with his natural charm and talent, created one of Hollywood's most bankable stars. As Gable aged into his 40s and 50s, maintaining his appearance became increasingly challenging. By the filming of Gone with the Wind, when he was 38, Gable was already using hairpieces to conceal his receding hairline. Makeup artists developed techniques to maintain his famous jaw definition as natural aging began to soften his once chiseled features. What makes Gable's case particularly significant in Hollywood history is how these early interventions were handled with complete secrecy. The public was sold the narrative that Gable's magnetic appearance was entirely natural. By the time of his final films in the early 1960s, the gap between Gable's actual appearance and his maintained screen image had grown considerable. On the set of The Misfits, 1961, makeup sessions reportedly took hours to create the illusion of the Gable audiences expected. When he died of a heart attack shortly after filming completed at age 59, many of his fans were shocked by how physically diminished he appeared in person compared to his carefully preserved screen image. Gable's case represents the most shocking transformation on our list because it was so comprehensive, yet so effectively concealed from the public. The man audiences adored as Rhett Butler was, in many ways, a manufactured creation, proof of Hollywood's extraordinary power to create not just stories, but the very people who told them. 2. Cary Grant. Everybody wants to be Cary Grant, even I want to be Cary Grant. This famous quote from the actor himself hints at the carefully constructed nature of his sophisticated screen persona. What audiences didn't realize was that Grant's seemingly effortless elegance and his remarkably ageless appearance were partly the result of subtle but effective cosmetic work. When Archibald Leach transformed into Cary Grant in the early 1930s, his physical makeover began with dental procedures to create the perfect smile that would become his trademark. Studio records from Paramount show that Grant underwent extensive dental work in 1932, replacing several damaged teeth and reshaping others to create his iconic symmetrical smile. More significant, though less documented, were the procedures Grant underwent in the 1950s, when he was in his 50s but still playing romantic leads opposite actresses decades younger. Close associates confirmed that Grant had a subtle upper eyelid lift, blepharoplasty, around 1957, addressing the hooding that had begun to make him appear tired on camera. Director Alfred Hitchcock, who worked with Grant on several films, inadvertently confirmed these procedures in a 1966 interview, noting that Grant's appearance had been refreshed between their collaborations on To Catch a Thief, 1955, and North by Northwest, 1959. When pressed for details, Hitchcock quickly changed the subject, maintaining the industry code of silence about male stars' cosmetic enhancements. What made Grant's work particularly effective was its subtlety. Unlike some of his contemporaries who would later opt for more obvious facelifts, Grant's procedures maintained his natural expressions and characteristic movements. The results were so natural that audiences simply attributed his ageless appearance to good genes and healthy living. Grant's longtime friend and co-star Katharine Hepburn obliquely referenced his procedures in her autobiography, writing, "Cary understood that his appearance was a valuable asset, and he protected that asset with the same care one might maintain a fine automobile or an expensive watch. He knew precisely when maintenance was required." Beyond surgical intervention, Grant was a pioneer in male skincare and fitness, decades before such practices became common. His daily regimen included facial exercises, specialized skincare products, and a strict diet and exercise program designed to maintain his slim physique and youthful energy well into his 60s. As Grant entered his final years in Hollywood, he made a strategic decision that preserved his legacy. He retired from the screen at age 62 after completing Walk, Don't Run, 1966. Unlike many stars who continued taking leading roles long after their prime, Grant stepped away while still convincingly playing romantic leads, ensuring that his image would remain untarnished by roles that might highlight his advancing age. This carefully timed exit meant that the public's lasting impression of Grant remains the impeccably dressed, fixed, impossibly handsome leading man rather than the naturally aging man he became in his 2 decades of retirement. When he died in 1986 at age 82, many fans were shocked by how different he looked from their memories, having not seen him on screen for 20 years. Plastic surgeon Dr. Jessica Wu, who has studied Grant's transformation through film footage and photographs, notes, "What's remarkable about Grant's work is how conservative it was. He never tried to look 30 when he was 50. He simply aimed to look like the best version of himself at whatever age he was. This approach, maintenance rather than transformation, represents the gold standard in male cosmetic procedures." Grant's approach to cosmetic enhancement established an important precedent in Hollywood. 1. Humphrey Bogart. With his tough guy demeanor, distinctive voice, and unique facial features, Humphrey Bogart seems the least likely candidate for cosmetic intervention among Golden Age stars. Yet the creation of Hollywood's ultimate anti-hero involved careful image manipulation that transformed a relatively ordinary actor into an icon of rugged masculinity. When Bogart began his film career in the early 1930s, Warner Brothers executives saw potential but had concerns about several aspects of his appearance. Most notable was a slight speech impediment, the result of a lip injury sustained during his Navy service in World War I that created his characteristic lisp and limited his facial expressions. Rather than attempting to fix this distinctive quality, the studio made the revolutionary decision to embrace it as part of Bogart's appeal. Makeup artists and lighting technicians developed techniques to emphasize rather than hide the scar tissue that slightly immobilized his upper lip, creating the taut, controlled facial expressions that became his trademark. Studio makeup artist Perk Westmore later revealed, "With Bogey, we did the opposite of what we did with most stars. Instead of trying to hide his flaws, we subtly enhanced the very qualities others might consider imperfections. We slightly darkened the scar tissue around his lip and used lighting to emphasize the distinctive way it affected his expressions." This approach extended to Bogart's overall aesthetic. While other leading men were presented with perfect hair and complexions, Bogart was photographed with visible facial stubble, strategically mussed hair, and clothing that appeared lived in rather than perfectly tailored. This carefully crafted dishevelment created the impression of authenticity that perfectly complemented his tough guy roles. As film historian Robert Sklar noted, Bogart's appeal was built on the illusion of no illusion, the impression that he wasn't manufactured like other stars. In reality, every aspect of his screen persona was as carefully constructed as anyone else's, just constructed to appear unconstructed. As Bogart entered his 40s and 50s during the height of his fame, maintaining this carefully disheveled image required increasing intervention. His receding hairline was addressed with strategic styling and occasional hairpieces for certain roles, while makeup techniques evolved to maintain the sharp jawline that had begun to soften with age. For The African Queen, 1951, director John Huston insisted on shooting Bogart without his usual makeup to enhance the character's weather-beaten appearance. The resulting naturalness shocked audiences accustomed to the more polished version of Bogart, revealing how much work typically went into creating his supposedly authentic look. By the time of his final films in the mid-1950s, Bogart's appearance was significantly affected by the esophageal cancer that would eventually take his life. Studio makeup artists worked extensively to minimize the visible weight loss and exhaustion, using innovative techniques to recreate his famous facial structure as the disease progressively altered it. When Bogart died in 1957 at age 57, the gap between his actual appearance and his screen image had grown considerable. Yet unlike many stars whose legacies fade as the artifice behind their image becomes apparent, Bogart's cultural standing has only grown stronger over time. This enduring appeal speaks to the genius of how his image was constructed. By celebrating rather than hiding his distinctive qualities, Hollywood created a star who seemed authentically himself, even when that authenticity was carefully manufactured. As film critic Roger Ebert observed, Bogart wasn't conventionally handsome, but he was cinematically handsome, his features photographed with a distinctive character that became more compelling than conventional good looks. In an industry built on illusion, Bogart's greatest illusion was appearing to reject illusion entirely, a carefully crafted authenticity that continues to define screen masculinity decades after his death and secures his position as the most iconic leading man of Hollywood's golden age. Our journey through Hollywood's most dashing leading men reveals a fascinating paradox. The studio-era stars like Gable and Grant underwent basic procedures designed to enhance rather than fundamentally alter their appearance, creating idealized versions of natural masculinity. By the time we reach later stars like Newman and Dean, the emphasis shifted toward creating the illusion of authenticity, manufactured images designed to appear unmade. Perhaps most interesting is how differently we discuss these interventions compared to those of female stars from the same era. While every facial procedure and body modification of actresses like Marilyn Monroe or Elizabeth Taylor has been exhaustively documented and often criticized, their male counterparts enjoyed relative immunity from such scrutiny, a double standard that persists even today. As we look at contemporary leading men, we see the same patterns continuing with more sophisticated techniques. Modern stars undergo more extensive procedures than their golden age counterparts ever could, yet maintain the fiction of natural good looks and healthy living as the sole sources of their preserved appearance. What remains constant across the decades is our complicated relationship with male beauty and authenticity. We simultaneously demand that our leading men embody physical perfection while appearing naturally blessed rather than surgically enhanced, a contradiction that forces them into the same patterns of intervention and denial established by the very first generation of Hollywood stars. The 10 men on our list didn't just define masculinity through their performances, they established the template for how male celebrities manage their appearance, age in the public eye, and balance the competing demands of authenticity and idealization that continue to shape our cultural expectations of masculinity today. Which of these transformations surprised you most? Did it change how you view any of these legendary actors? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this exploration of Hollywood's hidden history, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more videos that go beyond the carefully crafted public images to reveal the fascinating reality behind our favorite stars.